welcome to this month's Data Science Meetup. First thing, Meetup has 4,000 members now, so woo, congratulations, that's great. Hopefully we can get to maybe 8,000 by the end of the year. Maybe, tell all your friends. Without further ado, hand over to Olivia here. Olivia is CEO and founder of Ethical Intelligence, and she'll tell you a bit more about what they do now.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, so I'm Olivia. I am founder and CEO of Ethical Intelligence, and we are a service-based company that helps technology companies navigate this new developing world of AI ethics. So we are a team comprised of programmers and ethicists alike, and everything in between. So we're quite an interesting mix. And today I'm going to speak with you about why ethics leads to long-term innovation. And I do want to make a disclaimer. AI ethicist. I'm not an AI programmer. That's my other half, I like to call it. So my team complements what I do in terms of ethics. I have my team members that complement me with the programming. So we work hand in hand. The issues that we're facing in terms of AI ethics aren't solvable by one ethicist or one programmer. We actually need a full team working together on these problems. So with that little disclaimer, I am a philosopher by nature. So we're going to get heavy into concepts in this talk, but I think you'll like it. So we're going to start with, what is ethics anyway? Figured it was a good place to start. We hear ethics bouncing around in the news all the time. It's become that buzzworthy topic. It's kind of almost become a slang word that we use, like lit or ratchet. No one really knows what it means, but they know to use it in certain situations that they get a good positive impact. And that's kind of what ethics has become. Well, I wanted to pause for a moment and actually give you guys an idea of what the whole field of ethics covers. So within ethics, we've got three main fields of study. We've got metaethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics. Metaethics deals with kind of those funky questions of what is ethics, what is good, are we human? It gets really trippy the further you get into it. Then we've got normative ethics. That covers basically the concepts of right and wrong, how those are applied, the different functions of what good and bad are in the world that we know. And applied ethics, which is where AI ethics actually fits into. And that, as the name hints at, is actually applying ethics to real life situations. So I can tell you're probably all groaning at this point going, oh God, philosophy lecture, please stop. Don't worry, it's not a philosophy lecture. I just wanted to paint the picture for you to see how big and massive this field of ethics actually is. That it's not a straightforward, simple answer, copy, paste, black and white, quick, forward, easy thinking. There's a lot at work behind this field, and we'll touch back into that later on. But anyway, now let's get to the real question of why ethics matters even at all in the first place. Why are we even concerned with this concept of right and wrong and what it means, especially in this modern technology age? Well, this is why. Now I'm going to make the claim that ethics and technology, when used correctly together, actually leads to long-term innovation. So I can tell there's some reservation with you guys hearing this. You're probably thinking, for real? Are you sure? So what's standing in the way between me standing up here claiming that ethics leads to long-term innovation in technology and you actually believing what I'm saying? Well, two very simple misconceptions that we're going to go over, and I'm going to disprove now in this talk. The first misconception is that ethics and technology are at arms with each other. They don't go hand in hand, they don't fit. That ethics is actually a blocker to technology. That's going to be the first misconception we're going to tackle. And the second one we're going to look at is that constraints, aka ethical principles, are actually obstacles to innovation. That when you put constraints on your ideation, your creation phase, that it's actually an obstacle. You can't get around it. It's again, getting in your way of getting to that final goal of having a beautiful piece of technology at the end on the other side. So those are the two misconceptions we're going to tackle now. And at the end, we're going to take a look again at this claim to see if I have successfully crossed over from standing up here and claiming and you actually believing. So let's start with the first myth. Ethics is a blocker to technology. So you've probably heard this before. You probably deal with it a lot if you're coming from a technological background. And it's this idea that ethics has become this checklist that you have to go through. Just another assessment, another assignment that you got to go through all those steps, and it's weighs on your shoulders. You're like, I got to do this again. Why? I got to go through another round of paperwork. I didn't have enough rounds of paperwork. Let's add another. And you get weighed down by this. It becomes something that gets in the way of you actually developing your technology. It's become this concept that non-technical people who don't get it use to kill your actual innovation, your creativity in terms of technology. So this is the concept that ethics has been put in. This is the narrative that ethics has been put in terms of technology. And I would stand up here and agree with you. If that was the narrative around ethics, heck yeah, that's a pain in the ass to deal with, and I would not want to approach it at all. But let's take a different look at ethics and see if you still agree with this by the end. So I'm sure you're all widely familiar with the term of technical debt. And technical debt, as you know, is the decisions that you make early on in the development and coding phase that come back to bite you later on. You kind of patch holes as you're going in the beginning to try and fix short term to lead to help you continue on with your project. And later on, as it builds and builds and builds, it comes back and you pay for the shortcuts that you took at the beginning. So we have technical debt. Well, let me now introduce to you ethical debt. Works the same as technical debt. It's actually very analogous, goes hand in hand. And these are ethical decisions that are made early on, again, into the development and programming phases that you are making, either aware or unaware, and that come back to bite you later on down the line. Let's use an example. So I'm sure we're all familiar with that startup out of the States that created an algorithm that would actually predict the sentencing of criminals. It turned out to be very racist, right? It was sending black women to life in prison for stealing a scooter and an old white male to 5 months in prison after robbing a store at gunpoint. Very different, clearly off. Well, one of the decisions that were made early on that didn't seem like an ethical decision at first, but turns out was, if it later on down the line that came back to bite them, was the fact that they chose to use a data set, an old data set based off of an old system that already had these biases ingrained into them. Now, that decision that was made was actually an ethical one in the very beginning. So these, so to speak, ethical shortcuts that we're taking at the beginning of a process as we're beginning to set up our technology, if they're not handled properly, come back to bite us at the end. They come back, it's like building up a sandcastle to have it crumble at the end because the foundations weren't correct. So technical debt, I'd like to introduce you to ethical debt. And just as we would use technological tools to help us fix that technical debt, we use ethics to fix the ethical debt. Works hand in hand. So in this case, and I hope you're with me on this one, in this case, ethics is actually an asset. It's a tool. It's helping us fix problems that we started with. Just as we're fixing the technical debt that we have to deal with, we're also fixing the ethical debt and preventing ethical debt in the future as we're starting to build these programs. So, first misconception, that ethics is a blocker to technology, that they can't go hand in hand. I'd say that's pretty much disproved. Ethics is a tool. It's an asset. When we're building, when we're looking at the architecture and implementation of our programs, ethics is that tool that helps us prevent scandals, to help us prevent, not even PR scandals, but scandals on a human dignity level later on down the line, if we take and use ethics in the correct fashion. So let's move on to the second myth, that constraints are an obstacle for innovation. So we've gotten past the fact that ethics and technology are conflict with each other. We've now agreed that ethics and technology actually go hand in hand. They help each other. Ethics is a tool for technology. But we're still stuck with the fact that ethical principles act as constraints. Those are rules, regulations. I'm sure we're all very familiar with the GDPR. Rules and regulations that we have to get around that act as constraints. And so when we're trying to go for innovation, when we're trying to be creative, we're stuck with these constraints that we have to constantly headbutt into over and over and over again. Well, let's disprove this one as well. So I'm going to let this quote pretty much speak for itself. It's from Harvard Business Review. And it says, constraints can foster innovation when they represent a motivating challenge and focus efforts on a more narrowly defined way forward. So what this is basically saying is constraints actually lead to innovation. Mind blown. The reason for that being is when we're left with that blank slate, we actually have no idea what to do. It actually encourages a sense of complacency. We go for easiest way out. We think of, okay, this is the most intuitive answer, meets our problem. We don't have anything else blocking us from this. Okay, done. Whereas if we had constraints, guidelines to follow, what we're actually doing there then is coming up with the best possible solution. We have to try different means. We have to navigate through these different guidelines, these different principles. It actually helps innovation because it helps us bring about the best possible answer rather than just the easy one. So when you look at it this way, and again, we're taking ethical principles as constraints here if we want to look at it like that. These ethical principles, these ethical guidelines, they're constraints on our innovation, yes. But they're constraints that lead to strong innovation because we know what areas not to cross. We know what lines not to cross. So then we become creative. We start pulling on different resources. We start working with interdisciplinary teams to understand, okay, what am I dealing with? How do I make sure I meet those expectations? How do I make sure I don't screw over a bunch of people? So when we're looking at it this way, these constraints are actually a good thing. These ethical guidelines are actually a good thing. And in the States, we have the big players like Amazon, Google, Microsoft. They're all calling for strong guiding principles in ethics so that they understand, look, guys, you're telling me there's a line, but where's the line? You can't keep telling me there's a line and I cross it, and then you tell me I cross it. It's better to have that guideline, have those constraints set up in the beginning. Gets you creative to go around them. So, again, we look at it as ethics is leading to this creative innovation. So, thank you all for listening through all of that long preamble. But ethics and technology, we went over that misconception that ethics is a blocker to technology. We saw that ethics is actually a tool when it comes to combating ethical debt in terms of technology. And then we took it this next step forward and combated and disproved the misconception that constraints are an obstacle to innovation. We saw that constraints are actually an asset. They're actually pushing forward for better innovation. And if we view ethics as both a tool and a constraint, a proper constraint on our innovation, that's leading to long-term innovation for our technology. So I've proved to you now the importance of ethics in terms of technology. And I know I'm speaking on a broad range of technology when we did say this was artificial intelligence. I like to bring it to that higher level for technology in these kind of settings because I think it's a little more applicable for where we are at now. It gets us out of the weeds, it keeps us on that high level, let's look at what's going on here. So I would love to spend the next 5 hours talking to you about the actual principles and those guidelines and those tools that you use in long-term strong innovation for your technology. But I know Angus has a great talk, and I know you'd all probably fall asleep. We're pretty tired. It's a Thursday, so we're getting towards the end of the week. So I'm not going to spend the next 5 hours telling you all about this. But I would actually like to end on an exciting announcement coming from Ethical Intelligence that will help actually with kind of like the follow-up to this first initial dip into why ethics is so important for technology. So I'd like to announce that as of actually about an hour ago, our online course, Putting Ethics into Action, is now live on our company site. It's a 6-week-long course. Pre-sales are open until February 26th with a discounted offer. And it is basically six lessons in depth into the ethical principles that you're not only expected to know, but you're required to know now when it comes to developing technology in the modern world. So by the end of it, you receive a certification, you get access to our exclusive EI internal community, and you get to understand what these problems are. You're equipped with the tools that you need in order to innovate ethically for the foreseeable future. And that is the end. Question? Yeah.
anyone got any questions?
I saw you first.
Yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with your whole presentation, but with the URL that you have given there.
Yeah.
I'm sure that it finishes in .co.
Yes, it's
Oh,
.co.
Is it a new one?
Yes, yeah. I know we get that a couple of times, so thank you for asking.
I'm just thinking, because ethical AI is a new thing,
Yes.
there is a danger of over-regulation. I mean, while you're saying constraints are good, too many constraints are bad.
Yeah.
Same way some laws improve your freedom, too many impose. So how are you fitting in with the direction of what's too much, too little?
That's a great question, actually. We saw with the GDPR that was too much, in a sense. That kind of put a little too many restraints on, and we're trying to still almost backtrack from that. So what we're actually calling for is for technology, for tech leaders to actually literally take the lead in terms of this. Once they start proving to our policy leaders, to our politicians, the ones creating this legislation, okay, this is where you should put the line. We've played with this. Then the proper legislation can start being put in place. Industry and policy need to work together on this one. Otherwise, it will be overregulated and kill a lot of progress. So I agree with you there, yeah.
So a lot of this to establish trust for the policymakers as well as
Yeah.
the public.
Yeah, spot on, yeah.
So is this regulated with rules and principles or just rules? And I'm asking because I was in a conference yesterday, and one probably the biggest online retailers in the world, they were very excited talking about AI and how they have a team that makes sure that they are legally compliant with all the data protection law, but anyway, they can still, without passing any data that they cannot legally pass, do algorithms to do targeting to people, even if they don't want that. So then I'm thinking, okay, whilst you might be legally compliant, you are violating the principles. So you're just finding a way around to do the same thing.
I'm actually really glad you brought that up. So along the lines of GDPR, the EU and also the UK both have guiding principles in terms of AI ethics. And the EU actually set out the commission, the new commission that just came into rule, set out an initiative within the next 100 days to start moving those policies, those principles into legislation. So we're actually going to be seeing another round of GDPR, hopefully not the same strain of GDPR, but another round of legislation that will be far-reaching in terms of these AI ethics policies. So they're coming fast. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's something that we need to be very aware of now, especially moving into 2020. I've got a lot. Sorry, I'm trying to.
Possibly not a popular opinion in the room, but is it not just technology coming in and maturing? Because other areas, science has, especially environmental, has precautionary principle, medicine has do no harm. Surely that it's a necessary part of development.
Yeah, and actually a lot of bioethics, which is a very vast field, is being not transcribed, but translated to technology. They're looking at a lot of those current policies that guide bioethics, which guide whether or not to turn someone's life support off, those kind of questions. They're translating those into being applicable for technology. So yes, there are these standards already set in old fields. Technology is just, in a sense, catching up.
I was wondering whether you could give an example of the sorts of companies that you guys are working with and what sort of questions they're coming to you with, what sort of problems they have.
Yeah. Well, I'll use one close to home. We worked with the University of Edinburgh over the summer, actually. And I have to give the disclaimer, this is not actually it's not live right now, the program that we were looking at. But we were looking at the ethics behind using an algorithm to predict student mental health problems. So we were analyzing the ethics behind that, what that would actually look like in terms of implementing it for the students here. Like I said, it's not being implemented right now. It's still very much in the beginning stages. But the University of Edinburgh took a very strong, good first step forward by actually taking a step back and going, what are we actually doing in the first place? Is this something ethically good, or are we really putting ourselves at risk here? So I hope that's a good one, yeah. Right by.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, considering the fact that business organizations usually suffer from short-termism, understand long-term innovation.
So long-term innovation, as I define it, is actually innovation that's built to last. So I originally come from the Silicon Valley, so I'm very much used to that innovation. Move fast, we're going to break things, we're just going to innovate for innovation's sake, but it dies out within the first 5 years. It kind of keels over and dies. It's not meeting an actual problem, or it's created and there's misapplication that wasn't predicted. So long-term innovation is one that's built to last over years, to actually grow, to scale, to reach many people with a good, strong impact, and that it's built to last through the test of time, through these different principles coming into legislation even.
I'd like to kind of supplement that point with an alternative view. If we're talking about a long-term view, then ethical issues, or ethical standpoints change over time. So for example, post-World War II, it would have been ethical to prescribe cigarettes to an overweight person.
Yeah.
So how can you reconcile the long-term view with the knowledge that as a society, our ethical standpoint may well change within the lifetime of technology that's been built?
Yeah.
Some things that we consider acceptable today might not be acceptable in 30 years' time.
Yeah. A great.
It's a conversation for a glass of wine, really, but it's a
exactly.
It's a heavy conversation.
No, one of the great points in terms of technology, even people say right now it'd be weird to assign voting rights to a robot, and yet who knows? I'm not advocating for that in either direction, but who knows? Maybe 100 years from now we're voting alongside the robots. But when we're looking at that, which I'm glad you brought it up too, long-term innovation in terms of ethics is not a one-stop shop. It's not, here's our answer, we're done, let's move on. It's a constant feedback, it's a constant reassessment. Just as we as humans are constantly updating our understanding of our own morals even. It's that same feedback loop where you're going, okay, I'm seeing the world outside of me, I'm seeing what principles are at play, and a lot of these principles will stand the test of time. How they're interpreted may change, but those same core principles will stay the same.
I get you, but there's 2 points, because when you were talking at first, there was 2 things that sprung to mind, from your nation and from our nation. Not that long ago, slavery, not that long ago, imperialism. Ethical at the time, never born.
Yeah, but as we grow, as our knowledge grows, so does our moral understanding. So we have a moral intelligence, an ethical intelligence, well, not to quote my own company, but a moral intelligence, we'll use that instead, that grows with our time. As we mature as a human race, as we build technology that can actually help us dissect these different ethical problems, we actually become stronger in terms of morality. Hence why we're not enslaving people today, at least I hope. So.
But we're still doing some ridiculously awful things today.
Yeah.
My fear is that if we say, well, where we are today is kind of ethics ground neutral, I don't know.
No, it's definitely not ethics ground neutral. Yeah.
So just maybe going back to some of the questions that were on, doctors and engineers have some degree of professional liability for things that they build or what they do as part of the job. Do you think there's any chance that would happen to computing, or like things going in that direction?
That's definitely where the direction is going, because the decisions that computer programmers are making have an impact on so mmany more than actually they're even able to witness. So there's that fear that if we don't start holding computer programmers to a certain standard, or at least just putting them through an ethics training, the decisions they're making are going to have a huge impact on even more people than they can see. So yes, you're spot on. That's exactly where the direction is headed. I'll come back to you.
Yeah, so a couple of slightly linked things, so just answer whichever one you think is more interesting to answer. One ties in a bit with that liability thing. Do you think things like compulsory insurance have a role? Because there are, I know, certain regulated sectors at the moment that actually part of makes them work so well is that the insurers really kind of watch very closely in the risks that are being taken.
Mm-hmm.
Other question would be, is there a particular challenge in regulating something that's been often led by some of the biggest, richest companies on planet Earth?
Yes. Well, yes to the second one. That's a huge problem, especially when we look at countries like the United States, where industry really does lead government, hence my first answer actually was that it actually needs to come from the industry, not government. Government should be complementing what the industry is leading in. Unfortunately, right now, they're not doing a great job of leading. Hopefully, companies like mine, and there's a growing amount of us, will to help change that. And then to answer your second question in terms of compulsive insurance, I haven't heard anything in that direction. And I think mainly that is right now is we're still understanding the risks that are at play. Insurance company doesn't really want to insure something that they're not entirely sure what the full consequences will be. But I could see, especially in a case of self-driving cars is the typical one, compulsory insurance heading in that direction once the risks are fully understood.
I cut in now, just
yeah, sorry.
Sorry. You will be around afterwards.
Yeah, I'll be around afterwards.
Okay. Can everyone join me? Thank you very much, Olivia. It's brilliant. Quick changeover, if it works.
Yes. Do you want this one?
So I hope you got all your philosophy out of your systems, because I am. Oh, sorry.
Machine learning engineer studying a PhD in artificial intelligence, and over to you, Angus.
Yeah, not a philosopher, but more on the data side of things. So, yeah, actually, my second slide, I'm pretty sure, is who are you? Because I'm sure you're all wondering that. So, yeah, my name is Angus Odyssey. I'm studying my PhD in artificial intelligence, focusing on conversation and language. And so I thought today that I would go over a current project, which I believe is an AI for Good project, and then sort of something that I thought might take 2 months, which was the ethical approval, which almost a year I got to, and it's now approved. And I thought I would go over some of those steps. And this project is sponsored by the Data Lab and WallScope. So yeah, I'll go over some current work, ethical data collection, which might not be that exciting, but it's good to go over, and I think it leads on very well from Olivia's talk, actually. And then a little bit of fun at the end with a couple of sort of challenges in training and using models that don't often get discussed that much, as much or in the tech field, maybe in philosophy, I do not know. And if there's lots of questions, which hopefully, and you don't get to ask today or on the live stream, I know there's people watching, then you can tweet me and also follow, because I love dopamine and it feels good. So sometimes people pause longer than expected, and that was horrible for me. And even though I just started this sentence with many restarts and multiple words and repetition, you are all following exactly what I'm saying as I'm saying it. And human language is filled with these wonderful chaos, wonderfully chaotic things. And they just sort of don't get picked up by machines. So that's my main project. And so yeah, what I'm currently working on. And this is sort of a preamble to give context to the data collection side of things. And so we all have these sort of, as we have a conversation, if you imagine, sort of, actually in the networking today afterwards, when you're chatting, watch for all of the things I talk about today. It's really fun, and if you start pointing them out to people, it gets really awkward. But we know that, for example, we'll forget the words we're looking for, or maybe we don't do it ourselves, but we know people that tell stories and maybe have a lot of tangents that are completely not entirely to the point. And I'm sure we're all guilty of saying stuff like, oh, I forgot where I was going with this, or what was I talking about? And these are things that we all do, along with repeating ourselves mid-sentence, which I forgot, which was not on purpose. But dialogue changes as cognition declines. So these phenomena that we all do, everyone, as we have conversations in our everyday, it's kind of amazing how we actually understand each other. The deeper you go, the more we realize that it's just, I work with a linguist who just blows my mind every day. But these phenomena become more and more common as cognition declines. I just skipped a complete step. But if I said something, if we forget the nouns, if you imagine someone who has, say, dementia, they might forget the noun they're looking at. And so something along the lines of, oh, could you open the flappy thing on that plastic thing? And you might not know what I'm talking about, but if I went, oh, could you open the flappy thing on the plastic thing? You would know that I'm talking about the bin. So, as a spoiler, we don't just chat using words. So I can see that I've got eye contact from people. I know there's engagement. I saw a couple of people nodding, which if I then see someone confused and they've just nodded, I know that where the confusion was in between the nod and the confusion. And I see some people looking at. Actually, no. I was hoping someone would be looking at their phones, tweeting about how amazing I am, but. And laughter was what I was looking for there, perfect. So laughter is another amazing thing that we all do in conversation and actually has several meanings. So we don't just use words to convey what we're meaning. When we have a conversation, we use nods and ums and ahs and tilting the head and looking confused. And those are the things I want you to look for today in your conversations. But why am I telling you this? So we have these systems that sort of, we can have these conversations and we can adapt. So if I was talking to a conversational system like Alexa, I might say, Alexa, set a timer for 2 minutes. Now, I'm pretty sure my mum is watching this live stream, so I'm going to use her in this next example. But if I said to my mum, Mum, set me a timer for 2 minutes, that'd be very bizarre. It'd be very rude of me because I think it was Joel Fisher coined the phrase computer talk. We talk to these systems and we try and remove these sort of amazing things that we do in our everyday language. So I might say something like, oh, I'm washing my hands. Do you mind putting on the timer for a couple minutes, please? So it's a lot more messy. And so the computer talk is great if you can, adapt to the system. If, young children are growing up with these and, we can adapt and learn how to make these systems do what we want. However, people, older adults, and especially people with cognitive impairments, these systems can be useful, but it's more of difficult to try and get people to adapt to these systems. So, this is a map. The points on the map are not exactly accurate. It's just to show these are global challenges. But I've talked about voice AI becoming more common in our everyday lives. But we have an aging population. So in Scotland, the number of people over the age of 75 is set to increase by 79% by 2045. Whereas in that same report by the National Records of Scotland, I believe, they report that they predict the number of people in the working population is set to decrease. So we know that carers are already stretched thin. In 2015, they found that over half of carers reported that they had suffered from depression because of their caring. And that was 5 years ago. So carers are already stretched thin, and we have this aging population. But we do have new technology. So we have smart home devices. A lot of these are actually developed for older adults, especially in places like Japan, where their aging population problem is a lot more developed than ours. But even simple ones like smart heating, smart lights, and there was a person in a village I'm from who had to reach out to their local newsletter to ask the newsletter to tell parents, to tell their kids not to Ding Dong Dash's house, which has got a million names, but ringing the doorbell and running away. And that's because this person had severe arthritis in both of their knees. So it was really painful for this person to stand up, go over to the door, open the door to find no one there. And the kids weren't being malicious, but there's devices that exist today where I can let an Amazon package in without, while at work. So this person could see that there's kids at the door having fun, or they could see that their daughter's at the door and let them in without having to go through that pain. And that's just one of many examples. So this is by no means trying to replace carers, but just trying to ease the burden, let people live a little bit more independently, a little bit longer in their own homes to try and ease the pressures on our care system. So I can go into a massive argument, but voice is the best way to interact with these devices. I'll just skip, you can believe me on that one. But I looked for this data, and we found people with dementia were given pictures and asked to describe these pictures. And that's very interesting from point of view of what do people focus on when they get given pictures to compare to healthy controls. There was also more of a two-way interactions, say like interviews, but it was a lot more memory questions like, what did you have for breakfast this morning? What did you do yesterday? And not a spontaneous conversation that we'd have in the pub, for example. So I searched for this data and I went to dementia conferences, I spoke to other researchers in similar fields around the world actually, and no one could provide me with this data. So a lot of them even replied saying, if you find it, could you let us know? So at the start of my PhD, I decided, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to collect this data. That will be, 2 months or something. But not so much. So I started by collaborating with a researcher at Edinburgh Medical School called Sofia de la Fuente Garcia. And she had developed this map task. It's not this map, but it's a map where both people get a sort of land with caves and forests and lakes and a sort of wonderful imaginary fantasy map. And the person with a cognitive impairment, in this case again dementia, they have all the routes on the map. And the healthy participant that is going to have the second half of the conversation doesn't have the routes, but does have the journey. And so together they have to explore this map, and they can go and explore and look for treasure in caves, or they can do basically whatever they want. It's kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons type thing, just to sort of elicit this spontaneous conversation. But I had to go through ethical approval first. And I'll be honest, I did think, oh my goodness, why is this taking so long? But turns out the reason why this data doesn't exist as far as I could see is because there's a lot of ethical considerations. Who knew recording video and audio of people with cognitive impairments was an ethical problem? But it's not what I'm trying to do is bad or wrong, of course, but it's just to make sure that I'm not a bad person. So I thought I would go through some of the things, some of the major things. I wasn't sure about the sort of split of the audience, so things that are generally applicable to business and sort of everyday, sort of as you were saying, just because there's a rule, there are some things we should just do because it's good. So I thought it would be good to think about some of these things. Rule number 1 is quite a sort of simple rule. And it's to give the information sheets early. And this, I'm referring to participant information sheets I would have to give to participants, and I have to give them at least a week before the participant can sign a consent form, to give them time to read and digest and ask questions to their family or GP or me about this. And this is a great rule number 1 because it covers sort of everything. If there is something that you are not comfortable with doing this with, then it's unethical probably. I mean, you shouldn't be trying to hide what data are you collecting, how are you using it, where are you storing it. There should be no reason that you are uncomfortable with that scenario. So rule number 1, sort of always give the information. So this works for business as well. There's lots of company scandals where it turns out that Google's using, I don't know, who knows Google Mail? Please, no, okay. But Google Timeline, yeah, no, yeah, a few. So Google Timeline is sort of this creepy thing that tracks everywhere you go. So it's less known. And I don't think Google are hiding that. I'm not trying to suggest that, but it's just less known. And it's a bit more creepy, so it's just not as advertised. And I would say a lot of companies probably have things that pass GDPR, but may not necessarily be ethical. A second point that I found very useful for while going through ethical approval was admit that I'm not an expert in everything, and none of us are experts in everything. So just like the map task, I'm not an expert in developing tasks. So I collaborated with someone who's developed this wonderful task for people with dementia. And I think collaboration is brilliant. Another sort of point, which is a bit more specific to my example, is I'm not an expert in dealing with that particular person who has come in that day. I don't know them. I know my siblings and my family, and I might be able to spot things that are annoying them that other people might not spot. So we have to have a witness of the whole process, and that's to sort of cover if I was a bad person and said, "Oh, would you like a cup of tea?" "Oh yeah, that'd be great." "Well, if you just sign that form, I'll go and get you one." I'm not going to do that, but someone could if you don't cover it in the ethical approval and you don't think about what people could do. It's the same with ensuring participant is not stressed. So during the collection, if a participant is finding it particularly difficult and they're showing signs of stress that might be quite subtle to me, but to a family member, they would be able to spot that and say, look, we need to stop this. This person is in distress. And the last point, or one of the points, that the witness has to be there is to confirm that no personal information was asked for. So, of course, people will maybe say their husband's name or where they live, and we can post-process and remove that from the data. But I can't go and ask, could you tell me your medical history? That'd be great. That'd be fantastic. So another reason why a witness who is there, who knows this person, it's a sort of great thing to do. And yeah, I think collaboration is very much key in projects. Much like Olivia was saying, if you're not an expert in ethics, go to someone like Olivia, I guess, and get an ethical team, a team of ethicists, on board. I kind of covered this in point 1, to be honest, and GDPR sort of has got rid of this a little bit, but list everything that will be stored. So yes, I'm recording video and audio, but I'm also collecting metadata about that person. I need to know their age for statistical purposes and the analysis. Occupation is good. There's a cognitive assessment you need to do, and then there's different scores based on that. And yeah, gender, you can sort of have what hand does person write with. I don't have that, but all these things that you're collecting, it's good to note down exactly what you're collecting on a person. And again, that's the same for a company. You should always tell your customers what you're collecting and what you're doing with their data, because if you don't, why? And finally, securing the data. And again, I'm not really meaning where is it finally stored. We all know that we should sort of tell our clients and people, where is this data going to be stored. But in the process of collecting that data, if, for example, you're using sensitive data in a secure environment, but you're sending it to a cloud service, you're sending that data to a cloud service that may not be secure itself, and the transport between those two can be intercepted. So making sure that you stay within secure environments when you're sort of processing data. And another collaboration with another student at the Edinburgh Medical School who is an expert in hardware, we developed this sort of camera system. I say he. And we are now encrypting our recordings completely live. So both the video and the audio are encrypted live. So even if someone came in during a recording and stole the device, they cannot access that data. It's stored and encrypted and ready for transport into the secure environment that it will finally end up in. So these are just some of the things that I believe are good for a data collection point of view, and also widely applicable to sort of general everyday business. So, I forgot about this one. This one's a nice one. Sort of a little call to action as well. I'm soon going to be asking for healthy participants to take part in this study. And there is an ethical debate on whether we should reward participants. Often with studies, you'll say, oh, here's a £10 gift card if you come and take part. We decided to not do that. And the reasoning was, we would like someone to come in and have a conversation with a person with dementia. We do not want their reasoning to be that they want a £10 gift card. We don't that encourages the wrong type of person. So we had a long debate with the ethical committee at university about that, and we decided that was the best route. And so these people are volunteering their time. They're volunteering and coming to help a project that they believe is a good project. So they're not subjects; they're humans. So it's good to make sure that it's an enjoyable experience and don't feel like they're coming in and being used for an experiment. And it's late, I know, but I'm going to play a game. And this one is to make a point. So on the next slide, there's going to be 6 pictures. The top 3 are going to be 1, 2, 3. The bottom 3 are going to be 4, 5, 6. I'm going to change the slide and shout 1, and I would like you to say either cat or not cat. Based on whether the picture is a cat or not. And then I'll say 2, and we'll continue. And so it's a fun game. Hopefully, I've never done this. I'm hoping this works. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes. That's exactly what. So we talked about bias in data. So there's lots of biased data. You know, someone who speaks Doric might want to get their Google Assistant and say, oh, I chuck a tatty in a basket and an ing and an ah, and that's a bias in the data. They're underrepresented, for example, from Aberdeenshire. But this isn't a biased data problem. This is an annotation problem. It depends on what this data is to be used for. And I heard cat, not cat, but also cat-ish. And I think I heard big cat. So this is a binary game. There were two options there. So no, it's great to. That was a perfect response. I'm very pleased. And this was a game that I saw someone play in a conference a few months ago called Cassie Kotsarkov. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And it points out that objectivity is subjective. So let's say someone's setting up a cat sanctuary, and they want to have this fancy new system where any cat can come into their cat sanctuary. So Google has released the new cat detection model. They download it. They put a picture of a cat in front of it. Yep. Dog. No. They put their face in front. No. Another cat. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. It works. They put it in. They let it run. And they come downstairs a few days later, and there's a lion in their cat sanctuary. It's a bit of a crazy example, but the people who developed that model, I've chosen Google for some reason, have sat down and they've decided they're going to annotate their data. And consciously or subconsciously, they've decided lions are in the cat family, they are cats. And they have developed this cat model, and they have put it online, and someone's used it, and now, consequences. But it's a very good lesson for, if you're wanting to use models online, often they don't come with any information. They're this black box term that everyone uses. We don't know what data went in. We don't know how it was annotated. We don't know the sort of design of the annotation, the decisions, conscious and subconscious, about what exactly was annotated. And it often depends on context. It often depends on what you want to use that model for. So should we have completely transparent? Everyone should have to tell you everything that goes into their model? Well, no, because often with transparency, it's great, but privacy is also a big issue. So I think these two often go against each other, depending on your use case. Again, I'm sure that's what the type of web that Olivia and her team can untangle, not myself. But I've worked with medical information before, and I've thought about this. Thought, what? You can't just release, here, did you hear that John has a really bad verruca problem? It's you can't release this data. So, it's good to think about and evaluate these models. If you are using pre-trained models, and there's lots of amazing ones that exist, for a use case in your business or in university projects, evaluate those if they're going to be important. Don't just chuck a few pictures in front and say, yeah, that looks good. Evaluate with real data, do a proper evaluation, test that system, and hopefully that would bring up most problems. And I believe, my conclusion. So just to sum up, I'm doing an amazing project. No, but language is really cool, and I hope that this research, along with emerging technologies, can combine and actually try and tackle some of the big issues that we have in Scotland and globally. But this ethical approval, which I thought might be 2 months, has taken a year. But it was definitely worth it. I learned a lot, actually, and it's been great. That's actually how I met Olivia. I was just going out and asking everyone about everything, and it was a really amazing process. And I've definitely valued, making sure that, yes, just because I know I'm a great person and I'm not going to go and, ask people for their medical history unethically, someone could. So it's good to think about these problems. And yeah, please evaluate any model that you're going to use, because you're going to end up with a lion in your cat sanctuary. Thank you. Please no philosophical questions. I'm joking. You can ask, and if I'll pass them on. Are there any questions at all? Amazing. I'm going to escape. If you do have any... you know, you can message me on anything. That's fine. Perfect. No worries.
Cheers. That's it for tonight. Two amazing talks. I think you all agree with me. Just give them a round of applause again. So that's January done. February we'll be over with Rob in Glasgow. Give and date.
Be announced in the group.
Yeah. If anyone is interested in getting involved with speaking, can you reach out to us? Because we want to get the attendees more involved and get you up here instead of just sitting down there all the time. So please do reach out. Some more pizza left, some beers. So if you want to hang around and have any more questions for the guys. Apart from that, thanks everyone.